To say I'm afraid would be an understatement. I'm terrified. At first, it was only happening at the hospital, my workplace. Then it moved to outside the hospital, but now it's in my home.
What do you want? Leave us alone!
This thing is definitely malevolent. This was no shadow. This was no trick of light. This was the entity that is now in my home.
From the haunted heartland in Omaha, Nebraska, my name is Brian Corey, and I welcome you one and all to this episode of the Necronomicast, bringing you the horror of Hollywood and beyond. The Necronomicast is celebrating its 10th anniversary this year, and I can't think of a better guest to kick off this 10th year than Richard Estep. You've seen him on the television programs Paranormal 911, Haunted Casefiles, Paranormal Nightshift, and Haunted Hospitals. He has written over 20 books dealing with the unexplained in our world, but perhaps his most important work is with his full-time profession as an emergency paramedic and clinical instructor in Longmont, Colorado. We're going to discuss his careers with the living and the dead, and you'll get a remarkable insight with one of the leading and most interesting paranormal investigators working today. So sit back and relax as I have a late night conversation with Richard Estep. Calling in on our Newsmaker hotline, the Necronomicast hotline from Longmont, Colorado, I'm very excited to have on the program Richard Estep. Richard, how are you?
I'm doing well, Brian. How about yourself?
I'm doing fantastic. What a great pleasure to have you on the program. I enjoy your books. I enjoy your television shows, your take on the paranormal, your thoughtful, thorough investigations of the different places that you've been in the United States and I guess around the world. But Richard, you lead this amazing life, this very interesting life. You're also a professional medical technician. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm a paramedic, both a clinical chief and a street paramedic as well. So I spend my time split between administrative duties, leadership, and working 911.
And I have a very fine-tuned ear for broadcasting, and I can tell by your accent that you hail from the southern United States. Is that right?
Yeah, just a little south of Atlanta in Georgia.
Where are you from originally?
Originally from a place called Leicester in England, but I've been here in the U.S. since 1999. And
what brought you to the United States?
I believe it was a Boeing 747. Don't quote me on that. It's been a while.
Right.
But I'm lucky enough that I consider myself now a son of both worlds, you know, the U.S. and the U.K. I'm a dual citizen, and I worked in IT and came to the U.S. to work in IT back then and stayed. Put down roots and I'm still here. They haven't thrown me out yet.
We haven't thrown you out yet. Well, it's great. It's great to have you on the program. Just like I said, you had just a very interesting life you lead, a very prolific life with your books and your investigations. And so that must have started early on. When did you start getting interested in the paranormal? When did it pique your interest?
Oh, I grew up with my grandparents had a house that was haunted by the apparition of an old lady, a former owner. So that sparked my fascination when I was a young boy, and no TV shows that you could go to as there is right now. So I would go to the library and read everything I could by people like Hans Holzer, Peter Underwood, of course, so many of the greats that did their research and wrote about it because there was no other avenue to share their theories and their experiences. And so I think that's why I'm a writer today, primarily, although I'm known for my TV work. Writing is where I'm happiest and most comfortable. And it all harkens back to many happy childhood evenings sat reading with a flashlight, under the covers.
Oh, I know exactly. I kind of had the same interest in the paranormal. I didn't have any paranormal experiences. Now, you said you had the house that you grew up in was haunted?
My grandparents' house was haunted by the spirit of an old lady. This would be the Second World War era, but she would come in at night. My grandfather was away fighting in Burma. My grandmother was raising the family. And the children all told stories of this old lady that would come in and just make sure that they were all tucked into bed at night. and they never realized that this was the ghost of the former owner of the home. She had died in the house, and they felt that she was keeping a maternal eye on the children of the house.
You know, I jotted down some questions that I want to kind of steer the direction of the conversation with you towards. One thing that I wrote down, we all know that scary sells in the paranormal world. I don't hear a lot of stories about good positive ghost stories. You know, like the story of the you're saying of the old woman that was kind of watching after. You know, we always hear about stories about ghosts maybe moving things, hiding things, being mischievous. But I wonder if there's ever stories about ghosts where they just move something to kind of help you. Like, oh, this guy lost his keys. I'm going to put him on the counter for him.
Let's talk about that, because, I mean, it's one of my, I hate to say soapbox items, but the vast majority of hauntings that I ever investigated were positive in nature. And it was exactly what you said. I mean, we found a lot of places where somebody really loved their home or their place of work or a historic location, and part of them seemed to remain behind because they were very affectionate of that place, very attached to it, you know, and they seemed to be helpful, friendly. People seemed to have develop a kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Not a relationship, but they would coexist quite happily with ghosts at their locations. And that was true until paranormal TV started. And I bear some of the blame for this myself, because, as you said, scary sells. You know, if you look at my book covers, they're pretty scary. I have an artist that does some pretty creepy book covers. But when you dig into some of the cases, though, by no means are all of them dark and unfriendly and nasty and things of that nature. The problem is, not to go down this rabbit hole too far, but if you write a ghost book with a nice, friendly, warm cover, no one's going to read it. In the same way that if you put a ghost show on TV, unfortunately now people are so conditioned to expect the shock and the drama and the terror. You know, it's hard, if not impossible, to tell these stories of positive hauntings, and that's something we all need to do better about in this field. Is recognizing the fact that the majority of hauntings are not negative in nature at all.
How prevalent do you think are haunted buildings or haunted places?
Well, we need to look at a definition, don't we? Because haunted is a word that is an umbrella term, or it should be. Mm-hmm. Haunted, I mean, you can just look at a battlefield. Let's pick any battlefield, but let's say Edge Hill in England. And I'm picking that rather than Gettysburg. Gettysburg is my favorite haunted battlefield. I go back year after year. But Gettysburg is much more recent. You know, the English Civil War was several hundred years earlier. And I'm bringing that up because the only paranormal activity that's reported at Edge Hill now is generally acoustic in nature, you know, residual sounds of horses' hooves, screams, battle, the occasional musket shot, those kind of things. Because these kind of hauntings seem to wear away over time. They dissipate as time goes on, almost as if a battery is being drained. So, you know, it's still haunted in that you can experience something paranormal there. So when we use that term haunted, we tend to think, you know, things are moving around, there is interaction, there is all this stuff going on. Haunted, though, to me, is any kind of paranormal phenomena at all, even residual. And if you accept that definition, then many, many places, I think, fit that criterion.
Sure. I've heard somebody break down the math before. The billions of people that have lived throughout the history of the world, the billions of people that have lived, and then you take the amount of square miles on the planet Earth that are inhabitable and that have been inhabited, and then you kind of do the math. Almost every square acre would have multiple spirits, if that were the case.
Well, yeah, and you can look at this in terms of energy dissipating over time, or at least I tend to. Mm-hmm. You know, we keep hearing, where are the caveman ghosts? You know, where are all the phantom Vikings? Where are the ancient Greeks? And I'm sure that those ghosts were around at one point, but again, they tend to dissipate over time. The longest, oldest haunting I've ever heard of, and I'm absolutely open to correction if any of your listeners know of an older one, but was in York, England, specifically in the basement of one of the historic locations there. And a gentleman witnessed what looked like a Roman legion, a legion of Roman auxiliary troops, actually, walking through the basement of this house. And so, you know, that is kind of the oldest one I've ever heard of. But you don't hear of phantom Roman legions all over the place. You don't hear of phantom Viking longships anymore. And I don't think it's that there's a statute of limitations. I think that the energy that is put into or that composes these phenomena dissipates over time.
Interesting. Yeah, because you always hear about these things or these theories of residual energy, and you know they'll talk about, well, this building's made of limestone, or it's high content of this material or that material, and that's rumored to hold some kind of this residual spiritual energy that is kind of exuded from people or from events that happen there. And it would make sense that over time, just like any other kind of battery storage device that we have, that energy is spent, it's released, it kind of wastes away, kind of goes away. So yeah, you never hear any stories about ancient Roman guys in the Colosseum, you know, Christians being thrown to the lions. You don't hear about you don't see too many spooks or specters concerning them. Very interesting.
Yeah, and it's that whole thing, isn't it? You would think the Colosseum would be ground zero.
Sure.
The amount of blood that was shed there. And I suspect that it was that way at some point, you know, but now we're looking at millennia that have gone by. So really, it's the whole time plus distance. I like to describe it, if you're of a certain age, like a VHS tape. You know, I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I'm a Star Wars nut. And as a boy, I had a VHS tape of Star Wars I'd recorded from TV, and I must have played that thing 200 times as a kid. Sure. You know, if not more. And the 200th time I played that movie, the quality of it had degraded. You know, the magnetic tape degrades, the quality degrades every time you play it back, until finally you get these. You've seen it, right? I'm sure, Brian, when you had a VHS tape that had been played over and over again, and it started to kind of bleed through and look transparent. I think that hauntings might have a similar characteristic to them, that once they're experienced over and over and over again, they start to diminish and start to fade like those old tapes did. Sure.
And now I'm a musician. I was a music major in college, and I remember like when I was first started venturing out into recording studios, a lot of them still recorded to tape. And you had to take absolute care with that magnetic tape to make sure that, well, first of all, that it wasn't damaged by any spilled beer or cigarettes or anything like that. But you had to take real good care of it, and you had to demagnetize heads, and you had to do things like that to preserve the integrity of the tape. So like listening to tapes, you know, you'll listen to a little bit of it, and then, you know, it'll bleed through, and it'll kind of go from one part of the reel to another as the tape is kind of wound up. And I kind of think sometimes hauntings are a little bit like that. What I'm trying to get at, it's so weird. It's such a weird concept to me, because the last couple of years I've kind of rethought and changed how I thought about hauntings. I always thought that hauntings, like I read the Hans Holzer books that you did. I always thought ghost was spirit of the dead, or something maybe demonic. That term's really used a lot. But
overused awfully, especially in the US.
Sure. We're totally guilty here in the United States. But the concept of the ghost being just that residual, only being that spirit of the dead person walking after they're dead. But I was reading in your book, A Haunting at Farrar, and I think it was a hypothesis that was kind of brought forward by John Tenney about the caretaker, Will, who is very much alive. Hi, Will, if you're listening. Will's very much alive. He's the caretaker. But John had an idea that maybe this ghost, or a haunting at this haunted schoolhouse in Iowa, might be like the future ghost. Stay with me, listeners. The future ghost of this caretaker. And so I'm thinking of ghosts and apparitions and the afterlife and things like that, kind of stacked like that magnetic tape, like time loops around. It's just a very weird concept.
Well, one of the things we keep hearing from spirit mediums is, you know, time does not have the same meaning and properties in the afterlife as it has here, right, if you believe in such a thing. So let's qualify that. Now, if that's true, we need to think about and I'm not saying it is, but we need to think about the implications of what that could mean. So would it be possible for you in the future to go back and haunt yourself, or go back and haunt? I mean, I got to tell you, if I were to, heaven forbid, if I were to die today, I think the single happiest days of my life probably would be Christmases when I was a young boy, back before we all had mortgages and before we had all the stresses and pressures of adult life. You had those Christmas days that seemed to go on all day, that sense of anticipation about it that you would have for days building up to Christmas. I would 100% go back to my childhood home on Christmas morning if I could do that. And so why do we not think more spirits might choose to do that same thing?
Yeah, it's totally redefining or just opening the doors to all kinds of theories of what paranormal activity could be, what it might be, and probably what it is.
I used to work, and you and I talked about this just a few months ago, that you had a friend that has played music at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, and the Stanley, of course, was the inspiration for The Shining by Stephen King.
Right.
I did ghost tours at the Stanley. I gave those for 3 years, and one of the most interesting facts about the Stanley's haunting is that the majority of phenomena, especially on the uppermost floor of the hotel, is the ghosts of children, or at least the sounds of children, the apparitions of children, and yet not one child is ever on record as having died at Stanley. Not one. Which challenges the whole dead people hypothesis, doesn't it?
Yes.
And my friend Aidan Sinclair, great guy, illusionist at the Stanley Hotel to this day, has a wonderful theory, and I subscribe to this. Aidan said, if you think about the Stanley over its 109 years, I think it is now, of history, this hotel has seen so many happy and joyous times. But back when it opened, this was Disneyland for children, because there was no Disneyland in 1909 when the Stanley first opened. But kids would come here with their parents for the summer, and they would run, they would laugh, they would play. The halls would be filled with this joy and laughter of kids playing. And some of that has left a mark. It's left a kind of psychic, I don't want to say scar, because scar implies, negativity and trauma.
Right.
But it's left some kind of mark, if you will, that can still be picked up today. And some of those children are interactive by all accounts. I mean, guests at the Stanley will still leave a lollipop on the door frame above the door to encourage the children to come interact with them. It's a true story.
Yes.
And I kind of think that some of those kids might have just had the happiest days of their life back at Stanley, and may have chosen to revisit, in their afterlife, if you will, because it would make sense.
A lot of what attracts me to thinking about the paranormal, I like to think of it as it's kind of broadening my worldview and thinking about things on other levels. If ghosts aren't real, Richard, if there's no such thing at all as paranormal this or that, which I'm just being silly, but if ghosts aren't real, if none of this is real, what's important about these investigations and thinking along these lines of wondering what's out there, there's real stories of people. There's real stories of histories of places. It's important to kind of keep that in mind. I know a lot of people like to go and go into a dark room and hear things knock in the background or balls rolling when nobody's there, disembodied voices and things. But it's almost like a privilege to go to a place like, the Stanley's still in operation. But if you go to a place like you've been to the Villisca Axe Murder House, and you just wrote a wonderful book, A Nightmare in Villisca, about that. If you go to the Villisca Axe Murder House, what they've done is preserve the place to 1912 integrity, and you get to go and almost spend time in a living museum. There aren't the comforts of home. You have to go to another building to use the restroom or to wash your hands or to use a microwave. But when you're in the Villisca Axe Murder House, for example, you are kind of transported into another time. And for me, it just opens up the imagination.
Well, Villisca is really like stepping back in time. And the Black Monk House, which we're going to talk about later on, I think, is another place that it's like going back to the 1970s, even down to the old VHS tapes that are sitting on the shelf in the living room. And there is a lot to be said, I think, for immersing yourself in that feeling of going back in time. But Villisca does it, I think, better than any location I've ever investigated. it's not the original, of course, furniture
Right.
dating back to 1912, but it's close, it's period appropriate. And if you didn't take in, a laptop and equipment and things of that nature, you could easily fool yourself into thinking that you've gone back in time 100 years. And I think that may play a role in keeping these phenomena alive and going.
Now, you mentioned The Black Monk of Pontefract. Great book. Going through it, I was, reading, like, you're very detailed, and you wrote that with the owner of the book. Is that right? Excuse me, the owner of the house. Excuse me.
The house. Yeah. I investigated that house. Bill Bungay, who owns it. So a short backdrop here, but the case, which took place in the 1960s primarily, initially at least, the case had always been on my bucket list. It was one of those cases I read about over and over in a book by Colin Wilson, another of the paranormal writers, called Poltergeist, a study in destructive haunting. And so I'd always wanted to visit, and the owner said, if you want to write about my house, I won't ask you for any money. I'll give you the keys. In fact, I spent a week there. He said, just write the truth about what you find, because there's no shortage of people that say it's all a fraud, it's a money-making scam, because the owner does charge people to rent the house out to investigate themselves.
Sure.
And he said, if you find nothing, write that you found nothing. But if you do experience anything paranormal, I want you to be truthful about it, which, is perfect as far as I'm concerned. But he is also an authority on the case because he spent a lot of time in that house, done a lot of research on it, and produced the movie based on the haunting when the lights went out. So, I went in there with the hopes that it would be active. What we didn't get was objects flying off the shelves and things like that. It's never that Hollywood in real life. But I got enough activity inside the Black Monk house. Undeniably, that place is haunted. And it's one of the strangest locations I've ever spent time in.
I was watching a documentary or a show produced in England about the house, and actually you kind of write about it in the book. I was watching it, I found it on YouTube, just to kind of grasp a sense of the size of the house. It's a very modest home.
It's the kind of house you would walk by if you didn't know its history. You would walk by and not give it a second glance. It's like any of 1,000 other houses in the area, really. But its history is well documented. And what's unusual about this case, poltergeist cases generally are very intense, quite frightening often, but they burn out, they fizzle out. I call them the shooting stars of the paranormal world.
Oh.
They're bright, they're intense, and then they're gone. But this house has been active to varying degrees now for 60 years. And shows no signs of slowing down. And I've come to the conclusion that much like the Villisca Axe Murder House, it's the constant influx of energy provided by visitors, by paranormal investigators and tourists, that is fueling this haunting and keeping it going.
Almost like charging the batteries.
100%. It's like a regular buffet for whatever is in the house.
Now, I read about... Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, please, go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is I read through your book in the history of the area. Like I said, the house is very modest. It was built, I can't remember when it was exactly built, but what, the 50s?
Yeah, 1950s, I believe.
Yeah.
40s, 50s.
So we're talking about maybe more of the area, more of the land, more of the history of where it's built is more of probably the root cause of some of these disturbances.
Well, but then you run into, why isn't every house in the neighborhood this way? What sets this house apart from the others? I mean, yes, you're looking at a battlefield. It's on the Chesterfield estate. For estate, think subdivision here in the U.S. But it's called the Chesterfield estate right now, named after the Battle of Chesterfield, which took place in the area. But that was, again, the English Civil War. And there's no real evidence to suggest that what haunts the house dates back to the Civil War. And why aren't the houses on either side equally haunted? What is it about this one anonymous-looking home that sets it apart from the others? That's the magic question, isn't it?
Sure. I mean, what makes a house haunted? I mean, is it the house? Is it the ground? Is it the people that are inside, or the people that have lived there in the past? Is it stuff in the house? Objects, or can they hold this residual energy? Can they hold this key to the paranormal? It's a huge mystery.
Well, one of the challenges I think with any haunting at all is that you try and identify the factors that go into it, and I think there are always human factors. There's that old joke about, I'm sorry, not a joke, but the old saying, if a tree falls in the woods, does it make any noise? Does this stuff happen when there are no observers around to record it? And I do think that it does. I do think paranormal activity happens when people are not present sometimes, but there's always a human component to any haunting that I've ever investigated. We try and identify what it is. In poltergeist cases, there is very often a child that is around the age of puberty or kind of, starting to experience that hormonal growth. You see it in Enfield, you see it in many of the classic poltergeist cases. But you also look at things like the location itself, the construction of the building, the ground it's built upon. Then we get into, as you mentioned earlier, limestone. We talk about water, underground, subterranean pools and rivers and streams and things like that. And then you have to dig into the weather. Does the weather have a role? I've seen locations that are very active when there is a thunderstorm on. And I've seen locations that seem to only be active when the weather is good. And I've no idea why. It's one of the conundrums that we kind of grapple with investigating these cases.
Now, I've gone and spent time at Farrar, the Villisca Axe Smitter House, a place called Beatty Mansion in St. Joe, Missouri, the Malvern Manor, places like that. And I haven't had a lot of luck, if you want to call it luck. And I've gone with a couple of my friends, and and I'm always thinking, like, are these scams? Are they moneymakers? And I don't think so. I can't discount the hundreds of people that have gone in and said that something has happened to them.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Bigfoot. Well, I've never seen it, or we don't have any bones. Well, there's thousands of stories over hundreds of years all over the world of Bigfoot stories. So is everybody lying? No. Okay. So that leads me to think, well, sometimes maybe this paranormal activity is kind of a deeply personal, almost an intimate experience. Sometimes. I'm not talking about like the poltergeist hauntings where things are thrown and crashed and things like that. That's not very intimate or deeply personal. That's pretty violent and pretty explicit. But with these people having these paranormal experiences, they're meant to be personal. Maybe they're meant to be kind of intimate, a communication between our world and the next. And then that leads me to believe or question, how do we see ghosts from a scientific angle? Like, how do we see them?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
The first thing is that whenever it comes to a case, you always have to ask, and a detective told me this, and I keep it close to my heart, who benefits? So whenever there are claims, and it's happened to me, I've had requests for help cases come in from people that saw me on TV. And I've offered to refer them to a more local team, and they'll say, no, I need you to come in and help with this. So, some people are into this because of the fame, the notoriety. This is a field in which you can feel special if you are haunted or you live in a haunted location, and you should never discount that possibility. Some people will just want this to be true, and they will let their imaginations lead them and drive them, because it has a very emotional, tangible benefit for them. Then there is the financial aspect. So, Malvern Manor is a good example. I'm working on a second book about Malvern Manor right now. With fellow investigators Sarah Stream and Josh Hurd, the filmmaker. And
Josh has been a guest on the program. He's a friend of ours. Sure.
He's a great guy.
Yeah. You bet.
Looks scarily like Kiefer Sutherland, but let's not hold that against him. And so I went to Malvern, and my first thought is, well, you have to pay to rent this place. So there is a financial interest that they have in telling these stories and keeping this going. Key thing is that doesn't mean it isn't genuine. You just have to put that in as part of your skeptical, critical assessment. And I experienced stuff at Malvern that convinced me 100% it's paranormally active. Now, always ask yourself who benefits, right? Is there a financial benefit to the person, or is there an emotional benefit to the person to telling me these stories? You have to weigh that in. But that doesn't negate the possibility that they're still telling you the truth. You know, as far as you mentioned, the tens of thousands of eyewitness accounts you hear about, whether it's Bigfoot or ghosts or whatever, I consider myself to be a little more on the skeptical side of the spectrum when it comes to the paranormal. But here's the thing. The skeptics, the uber skeptics, because I think skeptic's a word that gets a bad rap, right? Skeptic just means show me the evidence, because these are some pretty bizarre claims.
Sure.
So what evidence do you have to support them? You know, and thanks to X-Files and Agent Scully, people now think skeptic means I will not believe in this no matter what. And there are those people out there. There are people that will tell you point blank, this stuff does not happen because it cannot happen. You know, there is no such thing as ghosts because it can't happen. It's all delusion. It's all, and they'll make these grand sweeping statements, but they have to be right 100% of the time. They have to be right for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of accounts of paranormal phenomena. If they're wrong just once, if just one of those millions of accounts is valid, then there's a phenomenon at work that challenges the way we view the world, that challenges our model of physics, that challenges our worldview entirely, you know? So how do you like the odds? Are the skeptics right? The uber skeptics, are they right 100% of the time? Or are they wrong just once or twice or 5 times or 10 times, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I understand exactly what you're saying. With skeptics, you know, they always point to, they want the science. They want this and that. And that leads me to another question I had for you. You see on these ghost shows, and I know reading your books that you've employed them, and you always have a really nice a disclaimer, like this is like a device that we use to either communicate with the spirit world or to measure something, perhaps paranormal, something going on. And you always make a good point of saying, well, this is what it's claimed to do, and this is how we use it, and we're going to use it, and these are the results. You never once say, well, this is concrete evidence, this is 100% proof, this is what exactly what it is, what came over this spirit box. I don't understand a lot of this technology. And I don't mean to sound like an old fogey. You know what I'm saying? I don't understand exactly how, when they say, well, spirits use this to communicate. And I'm like, well, if I got hit by a truck today and I came back and I was trying to speak to my family or speak to somebody that was looking for me on the other side, I don't know if I would have the necessary knowledge to come into modern times and infiltrate this electronic box and manipulate it in a way so it says the word get out. Get out, get out, get out, get out, get out. You know what I mean? I don't understand all the science between or with all these devices that are going on.
Well, you're in good company, Brian, because nobody does. And
right.
So if there's one thing I could share with you and your listeners,
please.
And again, I'll try my best not to soapbox, okay? But this has kind of changed the way I live my life since I got into the paranormal. You know, right now here in the US, and I think just throughout probably the entire world, this has been a horrible year, right? 2020 has sucked. And we won't talk about politics or anything of that nature, but we are a more divided people here in the US than I think we've ever been before. There's more hatred flying back and forth than there ever has been before. There's more mean-spiritedness. There's more denial of science, all that stuff, right? If you kind of start looking at the common denominator here, I'm scared of the people that are certain that their viewpoint is correct. Whether no matter how you vote, no matter what you believe in, no matter how you feel about diseases and vaccines or whatever your subject is, right? For the most part, unless there is scientific mathematical evidence to back it up, right? And I'm talking about ironclad, then everybody's trying to view the world as best they can according to their beliefs and biases, okay? The more certain somebody is that their view is correct, I found the less I like them and the less I want to be around them. And this is never true, right? It's true if you're at a dinner party, whether somebody brings up politics or religion or sports, whatever it is, it's the person that's certain that won't shut up and won't change the subject. Their way is 100% right. Is that fair?
That's totally fair. Absolutely.
So when you come to the paranormal, you have people that will tell you, all but pounding the table and tell you, spirit boxes do not work. It is not possible for the dead to manipulate radio waves in such and such a way. And then you'll have others that tell you with equal certainty, the spirit box is a direct portal to the other world. Spirits will do this to manipulate frequencies in this way to talk to you. Now, go ahead.
No, I was just kind of thinking of you being an EMT and you're measuring people's oxygen levels, their blood pressure, their pulse, things like that. Those are concrete things that you're using technology and instruments for.
You're right, but let's go further down that road a little bit. As a paramedic, when I measure those things, I can measure the oxygen levels in your blood, right?
Right.
But if it's a cold day, your blood vessels constrict, you have poor circulation. We all know you're outdoors, you get cold feet, cold hands, your blood vessels constrict. I'll get a false reading. That equipment will lie to me. And as a clinician, I know that, and I factor that into my assessment. If you come out of a burning building, heaven forbid, that's full of carbon monoxide, that actually gives a false high reading. It will lie to me and tell me that your blood is 100% saturated with oxygen, when in reality, it's 100% saturated with something that is a mix of oxygen and carbon monoxide. So, we understand that technology enough to say this is reliable to a point, but here's where the point is, and we have to factor that in. Now, we don't have the ability to do that with the paranormal for the most part. So when I use, say, an SLS camera, which is one of the most controversial devices. If you're not familiar with that, your listeners, it's the stick figure camera that hooks into an Xbox Connect, right? Mm-hmm. I've gotten results from that have genuinely fascinated me, especially at Fox Hollow Farm in Indiana. But also, this thing picks up a lot of false positives. So all I can tell you is I may get interesting results with it, but that's a phrase you'll see me use over and over again in my books. The jury is still out.
Right.
There is no guaranteed ghost detector. There is nothing to be certain about in this field. And the more certain somebody is, the less I like and respect them, honestly.
Well, and that's healthy. I mean, I understand exactly what you're saying, and I can get behind that. Now,
yeah.
I've just been raising doubts and asking questions about these devices. Let me tell you something. I was at Melbourne Manor. The second time I was there, it was an event, and there was Johnny Hauser was there, and I had the opportunity to ghost hunt or have an EVP, a spirit box, some kind of technology session. I don't remember the name of the device, but it was with Elizabeth Saint. And Elizabeth was holding this device in front of me, and we were down the hallway. You're familiar with it. It's the one with the room number 2 with the shadow man that comes out. And Josh was telling us that at some point, the patient, the person that was that resided there at one point, was rumored to have possibly killed somebody, or multiple people. 2, I think it was the number that was thrown around. And so, one of the questions I asked out loud, out into the darkness, I asked, "How many people have you killed?" Just like that. How many people have you killed? Without missing a beat, through this echoey, transmitting, receiving device. I don't know what it was doing. But through that device held in Elizabeth Saint's hand, the thing said, "Only one." And it kind of had a little attitude with it. You know what I mean? And before it was just kind of going shh, 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 shh. But just this clear as a bell, man. Only one. So,
and that's something that you'll see with those devices. You'll get nothing for 95% of the time, and then you'll get a zinger like that.
Yeah. Just
as you are ready to call it a day, that brings you back around, and you're like, "Oh, come on."
I'm glad you said that, because it's like 95% of these paranormal adventures that I go on throughout the Midwest. A lot of my friends that are squares they just know me as, "Hey, Brian's cool, but he's also the ghost guy." So they'll say, "Aren't you scared of going in these places?" And I'm like, "Well, honestly, tell you the truth, 90% of the time I don't want to say bored, because it's fun being there with your friends."
I agree with you. It is boring as hell.
Right.
And I think, again, we come back to TV having a lot to do with this, right?
Amen.
Do you watch any of those shows like the 911, like Lone Star 911 and things like that?
I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I've watched
Okay.
a wide range of paranormal shows, the good, bad, and the ugly, for sure.
So I love those dramatic shows, though. I used to watch ER all the time. The medicine on that show is great.
Uh-huh.
The 911 kind of shows where you'll see firefighters and paramedics and cops, you know, doing all this exciting stuff. I was a firefighter for 15 years. I've been a paramedic EMT for 17 now, going on 18. And the thing is that they managed to cram about 5 years worth of really exciting 911 calls into 45 minutes. And then they do that for a 22 episode season.
Yeah.
So if you go into emergency work, whether it's police, fire, EMS, or whatever, with the expectation that that's the job, you're going to get disillusioned very quickly. Because I would say 5% of the calls I run as a paramedic are life-threatening. Right? Which means 95 aren't. Now, that's not to say they aren't important. I truly believe that probably the most important thing I do, especially this year, as a paramedic, is comfort a person, and, you know, even holding a hand of someone who's going to hospice.
Yeah.
That's you know, but let's not. People come into the field, they go to EMT school, they expect to graduate and then be out there running cardiac arrests and shootings and stabbings all day long, and that's not how it is. But the shows give us this false impression because they're dramatized. Now, if you watch the majority, not all, but the majority of paranormal shows, you get the impression that things are happening all the time, right? Because they're edited that way. But what you don't get, and I try and convey this in my books, you don't get the hours of sitting around waiting for something to happen. You, like me, Brian, I'm sure, have spent days sitting in dark hallways, abandoned classrooms at places like Farrar, with literally nothing going on but crickets.
Oh, absolutely. It's a real good opportunity to see what direction your life is going when you're sitting in the basement of, for example, like the Sally House, sitting over a spray painted pentagram in this horrible, dank little basement, talking out loud, I guess, to myself. You know what I'm saying? So I appreciate, and that's what I want to get back to with your books. Your books are great reads because you'll talk about the not just the excitement of the paranormal or things like that. It's like, well, we traveled here and we met the caretaker, and the caretaker took on this tour, and we talk about this, and then we talk about that, and then we set up our equipment, and then it gets into the investigation. So there's so much more to it than just, oh, let's get our cameras out and start with a flashlight and walk in the deepest, darkest recesses of this building. Well, there's a lot more to it than that, and that's what I appreciate. Your books aren't sensationalistic. They're more of kind of a textbook, if you don't mind me saying, approach to having a true like investigation rather than just trying to get scared.
I do my research on vacation time, so you know, which is a finite resource to all of us that work, and so they are an adventure to me. And even when a location is fairly quiet, it's still an adventure. So I try and take the point of view that with a reader, I'm bringing them along on this road trip with my fellow investigators and I want to give them that feeling that they're sitting in the dark with us. You know, I try and convey a sense of the character of a location. And that's kind of what I'm aiming for. Because the truth is that if I wrote a book about the truly intense moments of paranormal research, I'd be writing a leaflet each time.
I understand that totally. Like you said, you spent a lot of time in these places. Now, when I went to Farrar, it was like a 24-hour, maybe 36-hour experience. When I went to Villisca 2 times, same kind of thing. With all these places, I usually make the drive out, you know, get the nice daytime tour, hang out there, get a sense of the layout of the land, spend the whole overnight into the morning, and then, you know, we're gone in the afternoon, and that's just the way it is. Now with that in mind, I read an article in the New York Times kind of early on in this pandemic quarantine stay-at-home mode, and it was talking about, is there an increase in paranormal activity because people are home and they're actually staying home in a place longer rather than rushing off to work, rushing off on a date, rushing off for their kids' activities, rushing off doing something else. They're home. You know, they're facing the reality of staying at home 24 hours a day, day in, day out, day in, day out. So people were saying there's more of an increase in paranormal activity. Do you see anything like that maybe being a possibility because people are actually in a location or being able to observe or hear things that they usually don't hear?
That is a great question. I've always believed that you need to spend more time in a location than just 8 to 12 hours. Back in the day when I was a firefighter, we used to study building construction religiously. And one of the most important books on every firefighter's shelf should be a book called Brannigan's Construction for the Fire Service. Frank Brannigan, he wrote this book decades ago, but he was the guy that said, the building is trying to kill you. The fire is what's going to cause it, but buildings collapse because they behave in certain predictable ways. And air moves and drags fire through a building in certain predictable ways. So a good firefighter studies a building, and they know, how a certain type of construction will behave under certain conditions. And it takes time to really learn when you're in a haunted location, learn the building itself. You have to know what the AC is like when it kicks in and it moves air in a certain way. That icy cold draft you're feeling could be that the AC kicked in and you're not aware of it, and it's gusting down 3 different hallways and you're getting the tail end of a breeze. Or it might be in a window that the insulation is not great, and you're picking up on that. You need to know how it creaks and groans when it contracts at the end of a day, when the warm weather gets colder and causes the materials to shrink a little bit. And so buildings have personalities, I believe it. And we all know, don't we, how our own house's personality is. We all know which floorboard creaks when we step on a floorboard 6 feet away.
What door sticks, what door opens up with, barely a slight breeze. Sure.
Right. I mean, the Fairfield Inn in Gettysburg was a good example. I was staying in one of the haunted rooms there, and I watched, oh my God, I wish I'd been videoing it. I watched a drawer slide out of the wall. It was the creepiest thing. And I was so excited about it. I'm like, oh my God, you should see this. I pushed it back in. My fellow investigators came into the room. They said, what were you doing? I said, well, I was just coming out of the bathroom and I watched this thing open. So they said, okay, retrace your steps. So I did. I walked back in, and when I hit a certain spot on the warped floorboard, it caused enough pressure. So, those vibrations went through the floorboards to the cabinet, just enough that it popped the drawer out again. And we repeated it 3 times. It was sadly a really good debunk. And I called Brad Kling, who, of Ghost Lab and Everyday Paranormal. And I told Brad, I said, we just got this drawer popping open in this room at the Fairfield. And he's like, oh, yeah. Did you just walk out of the bathroom? Because that happened to us too.
So he knew exactly what was going on.
Yeah.
Oh,
because
no.
The Kling brothers had spent enough time there that they'd studied the building and they'd gotten used to it. So, 8 hours, 12 hours, that's enough, honestly, to get a taste of a location.
Mm-hmm.
But to really know it, you have to be there around the clock for several days, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of deflating a balloon that I have. A real interesting paranormal experience that I think that I had. I don't know for sure. There is a theater here in the Omaha area. I'm not going to give the exact name of it because there's a lot of theaters, but this one theater, I'll tell you off the air.
Okay.
But they have been closed because of the pandemic. They haven't had actors and crowds and things like that, and so they're still doing a lot of their educational work and things like that, classes and things like that. They still have a staff. So I contacted them and I said, I'd be really interesting. I'd be very interested in coming in, and if it's okay, and observing the building from a paranormal standpoint, just to kind of observe the building. Would you guys have a problem with that? And they're like, oh no, please, because everybody on staff, for years, we've had all these stories and things, and we'd love to have somebody come in and we'll let you walk through this historic building. I had all day there. Again, just a day.
Yeah.
But I was in this one dressing area where they said, this door opens and closes all the time by itself. And I'm like, okay, well, so I kind of marked that down, and I went from the very basement of the place all the way up to the very top crawl spaces, and they just let me have the run of the entire place. Very interesting. It's in Omaha. Next time you're in, you should check it out. So I'm in this room, and I'm in this room for this dressing room for at least 10 minutes. And this door shuts by itself, and it has a doorstop on the bottom. There's a tile floor, and they actually have placed like grip tape so you don't slide or fall down the stairs, or it's similar to what you'd put on the top of a skateboard, to keep your feet in place.
Sure.
They have that on the ground, the doorstop down shut on top of that, and then the door shut. And I'm like, well, that's pretty interesting. That's weird. Well, let's try and debunk it. And I had my camera set up, and I'm not a cameraman. I'm just Brian, just me by myself. So I put the camera down, had a recorder going, opened up the door, and then I filmed myself pulling on this door with the doorstop down. I pull. It won't budge. And I'm like, okay, I feel pretty confident about that. It's an old building, no electronic access keys or locks or anything like that. Just 3 hinges and a lock, right?
Yeah.
So I sit for another 20 minutes in this room by myself, wondering what I'm doing with my life. And then I start feeling this kind of chill. And I get kind of goose pimply, and it kind of comes and it kind of goes. And then I'm like, just kind of looking in the camera and just kind of sitting there. Next thing I know, door just shuts all by itself again. Craziest thing ever. So is it a ghost? I don't know. Is it paranormal? Who knows? It could be just maybe at certain point the floor moved, the hinges, or at a certain tension level. I don't know. But I understand what you were saying about the drawer sliding up in front of you and being really excited about that. And then if somebody told me later that there was something wrong with some kind of mechanism in the door stop or this was going on, I'm like, oh, well, maybe I didn't have a paranormal experience. Or this door shut on me twice.
Well, and we have to guard against the idea that and I've been bitten by this, I've been guilty of it myself more than one occasion, sometimes we are so impressed by what seems like a knockout piece of evidence. We want it to be true, and we don't switch our skeptical brain off. We switch our skeptical brain off, I'm sorry. And we're not, willing to step back. I'll give you an example. I was working on an investigation in the UK with my good friend Wes Coleman, the Canadian investigator. And we were in a room with several other investigators of a supposedly haunted hotel, and recorded an EVP. And this EVP sounded almost like a tortured soul. It sounded like kind of like, oh, like the classic, typical, tortured spirit of the dead. And we played that back and looked at one another, and I did not hear that with my ears at the time. Did you? No. Did you? No. Absolutely, that was not one of us, right? No. So we're excited. And I'm like, we've got an amazing EVP here. There's no way this is, a random room noise. This is a person in great distress. That's exactly what it sounded like. And so, I was super excited. And everybody went around, was that you? No. Was that you? No, I did not do this. And then fortunately, one of the investigators had a camcorder running. And when he checked it, he saw that it was, in fact, one of the investigators in the room yawning.
Oh, no.
Now, you had a room full of people, including him, swearing that they had not made that noise. Because we're not aware of when we yawn a lot of the time, right?
Right.
Nope, definitely wasn't me, he said. But it was him. Now, I kicked myself for it because I jumped to the conclusion, okay, well, everybody says it wasn't them. They're trustworthy people. I believe them. But thankfully, we had that camcorder that proved beyond a shadow of a doubt, yep, it was this guy yawning. Even though he had insisted up and down it couldn't have been him until he found the evidence with his own eyes. And, again, we wanted to believe it, right? That's the thing. You don't want to believe you've wasted your evening. Nobody likes to have their time wasted. So I think we are predisposed to fooling ourselves if we're not careful.
Sure. It's good to kind of take a step back. And I've thought about it. I didn't put any of my footage online. I actually sent a snippet of it with some contextual forwarding to Josh Hurd, and I sent it to him, and he's like, wow, that's pretty impressive. And one thing he said, there was, he could tell it wasn't me faking because he can tell my reaction to it was real, because I think I swore. And I had a shocked look on my face too when that happened. So was it paranormal? I don't know. People say, do you believe in ghosts, Brian? I say, well, I absolutely believe in the possibility. absolutely believe in the possibility.
That's very fair. And people ask me the same question, and I always tell them I am convinced. Ghost, again, umbrella term, right?
Sure.
I wouldn't still be doing this after 25 years if I didn't think there was something to it. I'd be spending my vacation on a cruise. Well, maybe not this year.
Yeah, right, right.
But, I'd be spending my vacation in Cancun or something like that, rather than in, the hallways of an old abandoned nursing home or sanatorium or something of that nature.
Sure.
But I get enough results and I'm convinced enough that I continue to investigate, and it's my passion. But I still, to this day, can't look you in the eye and tell you I know what this is. And I challenge anyone that will do that. I challenge their credibility. I love working with people and I love talking with people that are like, here's what I think's going on. Now, I'm not sure. Here's my, based on my experience and my belief system and my biases, here's my opinion.
Yeah. Richard, that's what I really like about getting to know you through your books and through your television shows. I mean, I didn't even talk about haunted hospitals and Paranormal 911 and haunted case files. And then what's the one?
Paranormal Nightshift is
yes.
One.
Yes, I caught an episode of Paranormal Nightshift. What I like about, especially getting to know you through your books and everything, you're very fair, you're very open-minded. You don't have that opinion like, this is exactly what it is. This is a demon, this is a ghost, this is that. I like how you just kind of throw the evidence out there that you've collected. You explain how you've collected the evidence and what it might be, and you kind of let the reader decide whether or not they want to investigate further, whether it's this paranormal location or another one, or you just kind of throw it out there and you present it in such a not a sensationalistic way. And I appreciate that. Takes a lot of integrity, especially considering a lot of the different paranormal entertainment options, I guess, there are for people out there to consume.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, I'm a storyteller these days as much as anything else. With my paranormal books, the story has to be true and I tell it as best I can. But I don't claim and will never claim to have this all figured out. I don't think that's in sight for any of us, Mm-hmm. I do enjoy doing the TV shows. It's a pleasure and a privilege to work on haunted hospitals, Paranormal Nightshift, Paranormal 911. The producers are great people. The stories are interesting, and like any other show, especially a reenactment show like that, they do inject drama because otherwise no one's going to watch the show. That's the truth of it.
Right.
And again, when I'm watching that show, I like to give when we shoot, I give several possibilities to the producers. And I say, well, here's a paranormal explanation, potentially. Here is a medical explanation, because that's really why I was hired for haunted hospitals. I get to give a medical explanation also,
Yeah. In the time we have remaining, what are you working on now? What's interesting to you? What are you devoting your time to now?
Well, right now, because it's been such a busy year, my writing, I've only finished, I think, three books this year. I generally write more and travel more. And you would think that because I've traveled so much less this year, or barely at all, that I would have gotten more writing done. But my time as a paramedic is eating a lot of my time alive,
Sure.
I've done an extra, I think, 500 hours on the ambulance this year, in addition to my regular duties, just because that's the right thing to do. But in terms of paranormal projects, I'm finishing a book about the Monroe House in Indiana. That's called On Dark Ground. When that's finished, I'm working on books about Old South Pittsburgh Hospital in Tennessee and Fort Mifflin, a Revolutionary War era fort on the Delaware. We just also wrapped season 3 of Haunted Hospitals a few weeks ago, filming that.
Fantastic. Everybody, I've had just the pleasure of having paranormal author, investigator, and he's just like the congenial gentleman of the paranormal, Richard Estep. Richard, I really want to thank you for taking the time to speak to me and to the listeners and letting us have the opportunity to get to know you and your work and just all about you. It's just been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate you being here and making me sound like everybody's kindly old granddad.
Well, I mean it though. I say this a lot on the show. Like when I have guests on the show or the guests that I have on the show, I search them out and I asked them after kind of vetting them in a way. And what I mean by that is, like, I consumed your books. I read 4 of your books this year, saw you on television, other interviews with you, and I'm like, that guy is very interesting. He has a lot of great stories, not just about a ghost did this or that, but just stories, just great ways to get the information out and across. And I like it that it's not in a sensationalistic or a salesman manner. I don't even think we've mentioned your website yet. If people are interested in getting to know you through your books and through your other works, they can go to richardestep.net. That's richardestep.net. We'll have links on the Necronomicast page. But just thanks for everything. Communicating with you online and everything has been just been a real treat, and just really glad to get to know you and have you on the program.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate it. It's been a real pleasure to be here, and it's been fun sharing this past hour with you and with your listeners. So thanks very much.
Absolutely. Well, everybody, thanks for listening to this episode of the Necronomicast. Wow. Thanks to Richard Estep for being such a great guest on the program. Seriously, the guy's written like over 24 books. Most of them paranormal. Other kinds of books too. And his television shows and his work with the community. Yeah, he's a good guy. Proud to have him be the first guest of 2021. 10 years of the Necronomicast this month, or this year. Got a lot more coming your way. We're going to average about a show every 2-3 weeks in 2021. True crime, paranormal, horror movies. Hopefully we'll be able to get out and see a horror movie in the theater. Wouldn't that be fun? And we can actually talk to a filmmaker about what he's got going on. But the guests are going to be rolling in. Guests you'd least expect, but that you've come to expect listening to 10 years of the Necronomicast. Episode number 192, copyright 2021. Thanks to our listeners in the armed forces serving us overseas. I see out there, I get the stats. Listeners all over the world. Everybody, thanks a lot. Now go get some sleep.